Before the MGM Grand burned, there was a document that made one part of the hotel cheaper to build and harder to survive. One side of that file held a construction decision. 7 years later, the other side held 85 dead. This case does not begin with flame. It begins earlier, while the building was still being approved, still being priced, still being interpreted by the people who had the power to decide what safety required. In that record, there was a consultant warning about unsprinklered space. There was a reported sprinkler price of $192,000, and there was a county ruling that the sprinkler requirement did not apply to the hotel and casino. The MGM Grand fire is often remembered as a restaurant fire that became a hotel disaster. That is true, but it is not enough. The fire began in a restaurant area. Most of the deaths were upstairs. The connection between those facts was not flame climbing a tower. It was a building that had been allowed to meet fire without its first defense. A large part of the MGM Grand opened without automatic sprinkler protection. An automatic sprinkler is a built-in fire suppression device that opens when heat reaches it. It does not wait for a phone call. It does not wait for a person to find smoke. It acts while the fire is still local. That is why the missing system matters. The federal litigation record did not describe one mistake. It described a chain. The federal litigation record, quoting NFPA, listed the major loss factors as rapid fire and smoke spread through the casino, lack of early extinguishment, vertical openings, problems with stair and exit enclosures, smoke movement through HVAC equipment, and smoke movement through elevator shafts. HVAC means the building's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. In plain language, the building's air handling system helped move smoke. The commonly cited toll is 85. The court record separates 84 immediate deaths from 3 more fatalities within a year, which is why later accounts do not always count the disaster the same way. Firehouse reports 85 dead and 650 sent to hospitals, including guests, employees, and 14 firefighters. The numbers keep the case from becoming abstract. There were guests asleep in rooms above the casino. There were employees already on shift. There were firefighters entering a ground floor fire while smoke was moving through a hotel tower above them. Many people upstairs did not need to see flame to be in danger. The danger came through air. Most of the dead were not killed by fire reaching the upper floors. They were killed by smoke. Smoke moved through the building's air handling system, through shafts, through stairways, through elevator routes, and through gaps designed to let a large building move. The fatal exposure was higher than the fire, quieter than the fire, and harder to understand if the story is told only as a restaurant ignition. The MGM Grand opened in December 1973 as a modern resort built at a scale Las Vegas was learning to treat as normal. It had 26 stories and 2,078 rooms. The complex covered about 2 million square feet. The casino alone covered about 450,000 square feet. That is not a room in any ordinary sense. It is an indoor city floor with restaurants, gaming areas, service routes, concealed spaces, and thousands of people passing through. Scale creates confidence. It can also hide dependency. The MGM Grand was not entirely without sprinklers. That correction matters. Partial protection existed in selected ground-level areas, but Firehouse reports that sprinklers were not installed in the high-rise hotel, the casino, and the restaurant areas. KNPR's later history of the fire says smoke detectors, fire alarms, and sprinklers were not required by law when MGM was built, and later county codes were not retroactive. So the question is not whether one sprinkler had existed somewhere in the complex. The question is why the casino, hotel floors, and restaurant areas carried the risk differently. The fire side of Clark County wanted more protection. Firehouse reports pressure from the fire marshal during and after construction. But NFPA later described a split in authority. Clark County Building and Safety had primary code enforcement responsibility. The fire department did not have building code enforcement authority. That split was not a small bureaucratic detail. It meant the people trained to see the fire problem did not hold the final construction power. Their judgment could be present in the file and absent from the decision. Advice without authority can become only a warning that someone else is free to price. Here, the warning had a number attached. Firehouse, summarizing NFPA and contemporary reporting, puts the sprinkler cost at $192,000 against a total construction cost of $106 million. Firehouse reports that Orvin Engineering warned that the liability of all the unsprinkled areas in this building should be a concern to your corporation. That sentence is the center of the file. It did not predict the exact morning. It did not name the deli. It did not describe smoke moving through elevator shafts years later. But it identified the condition that would matter when the building met fire: unsprinkled space in a massive occupied resort. I would treat that as the warning because it joined three things before anyone died: the known condition, the professional concern, and the price of removing it. Firehouse reports MGM chairman Fred Benninger decided against installing sprinklers after the consultant warning. Firehouse also reports that MGM sought relief from the Clark County Building Department, and that building director John Pisciotta ruled the sprinkler requirements did not apply to the hotel and casino. The exact date, full wording, and signatory of the exemption decision are not established in the record used for this reconstruction. That missing page should not be replaced with guesswork. But the effect of the decision is clear. The system had a place where fire concern could be heard, priced, and still overruled. Later fire safety summaries describe the deli as having been treated as a 24-hour area. The assumption mattered because early discovery depended on people being present. If a room is always occupied, the logic says someone will see fire before it becomes the room. If the room is not occupied at the critical moment, the logic fails exactly where the sprinkler would have acted. On the morning of November 21st of 1980, the record gives a discovery, not a prevention. Around 7:05 a.m., an employee noticed fire. Later summaries describe a flickering light, then a wall of flame. Clark County Fire Department received the call at 7:17. The first engine arrived at 7:19. The fire was first a local event, then it became a building event. A sprinkler is not an escape route. It is earlier than escape. Its value is not that it tells a guest which stair to use. Its value is that it can attack a fire while the fire is still small enough for the first room to matter. In the MGM Grand record, the missing system matters because by the time many people needed corridors, stairs, elevators, and doors, the building had already lost the first fight. Within about 6 minutes of discovery, Firehouse reports, the casino area was involved. The reported rate of spread was 15 to 19 feet per second. That number is almost too fast to picture as human response. The fire department was called at 7:17. An engine arrived 2 minutes later. That speed did not solve the problem because the problem was no longer only arrival. The problem was what the building had allowed before arrival could change the outcome. By then, the question was no longer only where the fire began. It was why a huge occupied resort had been allowed to meet fire without automatic suppression at the point of origin. There is also a limit to what the record can honestly reconstruct. It can identify major contributing factors. It can show lack of early extinguishment. It can show rapid smoke movement. It can show vertical openings, stair and exit enclosure problems, elevator smoke spread, and air handling equipment moving smoke. It cannot recover every small action in the minutes before the fire was seen. That is where reconstruction has to stop. The fire itself was largely a ground floor event. That is what makes the deaths upstairs so important to understand. Firehouse reports that the main casino fire was controlled by about 8:30 a.m. Fire damage did not extend to the high-rise hotel. If the story is imagined as flame climbing 26 stories, it is imagined incorrectly. Flame did not need to climb 26 stories when smoke could use the building. The casino gave the fire volume. The building gave the smoke routes. The federal litigation record, quoting NFPA, described rapid fire and smoke spread through the casino area. It also listed vertical openings, stair and exit enclosure defects, HVAC smoke movement, and elevator smoke spread as major factors. In a large building, smoke does not need a hallway in the way a person does. It moves through pressure differences, heat, fans, gaps, shafts, and openings. It follows the hidden geometry of the structure. Smoke moved through the building's air handling system. It moved through vertical shafts. It moved through interior stairways. It moved through elevator hoistways, the vertical shafts that elevators move through. It moved through seismic joints, the building gaps designed to let sections move during an earthquake. The fire did not have to break every barrier by force. Smoke found routes that were already there. In a locked door story, the door is sometimes literal. Here it was architectural. The exits still existed. The rooms still had doors. The stairs still had locations and names. But a route of escape is only useful if it remains survivable. A corridor can be open and still become a trap. A stair can be present and still become hostile space. A tower can stand untouched by flame and still fail the people inside because the dangerous material is not fire on the carpet. It is smoke in the lungs. That is the cruel engineering of this case. The building did not have to collapse. The flames did not have to reach the rooms. The ground floor fire only had to produce enough smoke, quickly enough, for the hotel's own paths to carry it where people were sleeping. Automatic suppression at the point of origin would not have repaired every stair enclosure. It would not have sealed every shaft. It would not have made the building perfect. But early suppression is the fight that keeps every other weakness from being tested at once. The main casino fire was controlled by about 8:30 a.m. That fact should prevent the wrong conclusion. The central question was not whether firefighters arrived. It was not whether the active fire was eventually controlled. It was what the building had already allowed before human response could catch up. The legal aftermath did not produce one simple confession. The lawsuits involved owners, contractors, suppliers, inspectors, and public agencies. A disaster born in a code interpretation became a legal architecture of responsibility. The court record shows the MGM defendants entered a $75 million settlement stipulation, with present value estimated at about $69 million. Firehouse reports a $223 million settlement fund and an MGM $105 million settlement with no negligence admitted. The court described Clark County's payment as tied to alleged inspection and code enforcement failures. Clark County and the Clark County Fire Protection District contributed $2.5 million. The numbers matter, but they are not the verdict by themselves. The stronger verdict came in what changed after the fire. Governor List convened a fire safety commission. That was the expected move after a disaster of this scale. A commission gathers testimony, proposals, authority, and politics in one place. But even after 85 deaths, the first response stopped short. KNPR's later history of the fire says the commission bowed to gaming industry pressure and did not require full sprinkler retrofit for existing structures. Retrofit means adding safety systems to an existing building after construction. That detail matters because it shows reform was not automatic. The MGM fire did not immediately make the obvious answer politically easy. Then the Las Vegas Hilton burned. 15 hours after that fire, SB 214 was introduced in Carson City. The law that followed required protection in the high-rise buildings. The exemption era had left too dependent on interpretation and partial systems. The 1981 Nevada statute required buildings with human occupancy above 55 feet to equip exit corridors with sprinklers and to place sprinklers in rooms above doors into corridors. It was not a perfect rewriting of the past. Laws rarely are, but it was a legislative answer to the failure of the older framework. The system that had allowed a major resort to carry unsprinklered hotel, casino, and restaurant areas was no longer politically safe after MGM and Hilton. MGM reopened on July 30, 1981, after 8 months and $50 million in reconstruction. KNPR reports that the reopened property included a new $5 million fire suppression and monitoring system. That is another verdict in practical form. The building that had opened without full sprinkler protection reopened with a modern suppression and monitoring system because the old arrangement could not be defended the same way after the deaths. The city changed more slowly than a single reopening. KNPR reports that by 1983, Las Vegas was described as having adopted the toughest safety code in the nation, while full strip compliance took several years. First came the MGM fire, then a commission, then political pressure limited the first reform response, then the Hilton fire shifted the ground, then SB 214 moved through Carson City, then buildings still needed time, money, and work to comply. A disaster can reveal a lesson in one morning. A city may take years to admit it. The clean defense is that the MGM Grand met the law as the law was interpreted. That defense cannot be dismissed casually. KNPR reports that smoke detectors, fire alarms, and sprinklers were not required by law when MGM was built, and that later county codes were not retroactive. Firehouse reports that Clark County's building director ruled the sprinkler requirements did not apply to the hotel and casino. NFPA identified the building department as the primary code enforcement authority, not the fire department. So yes, the legal minimum matters, but it does not end the question. The myth says compliance is safety. The record says compliance can also show who had the authority to accept a risk. The exact disaster could not be scripted in advance. The hour, the room conditions, the path of smoke, and the human toll were not all known, but the unsprinklered condition was known. The consultant's concern was known. The enforcement split was known. The price was known. That is the difference between hindsight and warning. The broader claim that lobbying blocks sprinkler requirements for 2 decades needs production verification. It may belong to a larger political history, but it is not proved by the open record for this case. What the record supports is narrower and still important. KNPR's later history says that in 1981, gaming industry pressure shaped the first reform response and kept full existing structure sprinkler retrofit out of it. That is not a 2-decade claim. It is a specific pressure point after a specific disaster. The MGM Grand fire began as an electrical fire in a restaurant area, but that is not where the case ends. A restaurant fire became a casino fire because the first intervention was missing. A casino fire became a hotel disaster because smoke found the roots the building provided. A hotel disaster became a legal and political reckoning because the exemption had not been an accident of nature. It was a decision made in a system where cost, code interpretation, and authority did not line up on the side of prevention. The later changes point back at the earlier decision. The new suppression system, the high-rise sprinkler law, the retrofitting of the Strip, the claim that Las Vegas later adopted the toughest safety code in the nation. All of them say the old arrangement had been legally possible and still unacceptable after it was tested. That does not mean one sprinkler decision explains every death by itself. It does not mean every official knew the future and chose it. It means a known unsprinklered risk remained inside a huge occupied resort because the cost, the code interpretation, and the jurisdictional structure permitted it. When fire arrived, the missing early suppression left the rest of the building to prove whether its hidden routes and separations could protect people from smoke. They could not. My read is that the verdict was written twice. First in the exemption that saved $192,000, then in the law that admitted Las Vegas could not afford that kind of savings again.